church benches and into the trenches. Let's make a righteous ruckus.
Hey, welcome to the Righteous Ruckus podcast. I'm your host, Riley Lowe. Once again, I'm glad to be here with you today. And quite frankly, this is the beginning of this is the end of February. February 22nd is when I'm recording this, actually, and in 2025. And we're finally getting reprieve from the cold. If you don't know, I live in central Oklahoma, and we get kind of the extremes, right? We get 110 plus degrees in the summertime, when we get this weather where we've been, 0 or below zero in the wintertime. And we've had just this stretch of cold weather. We had one last week, stretched a few days where it was just so brutal cold. And then this week, several days where we had snow and ice and just everything just comes to a standstill. We're finally getting a reprieve. So it kind of feels like spring right now. It's supposed to be 50 something degrees today. Within the next 2 days, it's going to be, when this airs, it's going to be 71 degrees, I believe here, 72 degrees here, which is going to be spring-like weather. Everything's going to start greening up. Everything's going to start blooming. And it really got me thinking about this. I actually saw this quote the other day. I was like, oh, that's so profound. The quote goes like this: The branch that produces the most fruit bows the lowest. The branch that produces the most fruit bows the lowest. Think of the spiritual implications of that. We have, I guess you could say, technically 4 pear trees on our property, right? 2 of them are these Bradford pears that here in a little bit, they're going to start blooming out. They're prized for their uniform shape and all the white blossoms that are on them in the springtime, right? That's what they're prized for. Now were prized for. They're actually a invasive species now. They've propagated. They're all over the place, and they're an invasive species now. People environmentally don't like them, but we do have 2 other pears. I don't remember what they're called. The pears. I think they're better for canning than they are for just grabbing off their ripe and eating. But they're kind of native around here, I guess. But in any event, those are the trees. They do produce some white flowers. Not as many as the Bradford pears, but they do produce white flowers in the springtime. Now, they are scraggly looking. They're not as pretty. They don't have a uniform crown like the Bradford pears do, but they produce edible fruit. They produce fruit that you can eat, that you can get sustenance from, right? And that's what I love about them. And actually, we've had on years that they produce a lot. They're right out by a main road, and we'll have people stop by. We have a couple times and say, "Hey, I noticed you got a lot of pears out there. Would it be okay if I stopped and picked some, to make some jelly or whatever?" And I'm like, "Yeah, sure, go ahead." And but there's one on the bigger of the 2 pear trees that produce fruit. There's a branch that right now I can go out there and I can walk under that, right? It's, I'm right almost 6 foot, and it's 6 foot off the ground. I can walk under that branch right now out there. But when here in a few months, when that fruit really starts getting on there, that branch will get lower and lower and lower to where it's almost touching the ground. So that branch has bowed and bent down almost 6 foot, right, to touching the ground. I can't mow under it. It honestly kind of gets in the way. Now, the deer like that because they love to eat the pears. So they can walk right out there and they can start eating pears off the tree, and they love that. But it makes it kind of a hassle. Now, I'll probably prune up a little bit of it just cause, but that is when I read that the bough that produces the most fruit or the branch that produces the most fruit bows the lowest. Man, that's the first thing that popped into my mind is that tree. Now, the Bradford pear trees, they don't produce hardly any fruit. Their fruits are little bitty things that look about the size of a pea, all right? Not a pea pod, just an individual pea, and that drop down. You can't eat them. They're worthless. Nothing likes them. I think maybe there's some like some of the birds kind of scrap around and kind of eat a little. That's like the dead of winter. They're trying to eat that because there's not a whole lot else left. Nothing really wants to eat those, right? But they look pretty, but they just don't. They don't bow down because that fruit does not weigh them down. They're not producing a significant amount, like significant weight in the fruit. They're more for show, right? And how many of our churches, how many Christians, how many times in your life, in my life, have we just done something for show and while the fruit suffered, you know? A lot of times in my life I've done that. It's really convicting to think about. Now here's what I want you to think about here. Let's get into here. Let's get into some Bible verses, just a couple of them. Before we talk about a little bit of the vine and the branch and the fruit, I want to talk about what is the fruit. So think about these things in your life. How much fruit do you have in your life, right? How much fruit do I have in my life? And this is from Galatians 5, verses 22 through 26. But the fruit of the Spirit is love, joy, peace, long-suffering, kindness, goodness, faithfulness, gentleness, self-control. And against such there is no law. And those who are Christ's have crucified the flesh and its passions and desires. If we live in the Spirit, let us also walk in the Spirit. Let us not become conceited, provoking one another, envying one another. So you got love. Think about that. Go through this list. Just kind of do a self-reflective thing right now as you're watching or listening to this. How much love is evident in my life? How much joy is evident in my life? How much peace? How much long-suffering? How much are you willing to forgive people and kind of give them a break, right? How much kindness, how much goodness, how much faithfulness, how much gentleness, how much self-control is evident in your life. Those are the fruits of the Spirit. That should be evident in all our lives. And I want you to think about, and I want to think about, am I being more like those Bradford pear trees and just kind of putting on a good show, or am I actually bearing the fruit that's causing me to bow down? Or actually the reference of that little catchphrase that I mentioned earlier is more alluding to bowing down and bearing fruit, right? You need to bow down and submit to Christ. Just like it said, and those who are Christ's have crucified the flesh with its passions and desires. If we live in the Spirit, let us also walk in the Spirit. We need to bow down. We need to not succumb, but we need to submit ourselves to God's will for our lives. Submit yourself. I need to submit myself fully to God's will to my life. The more I submit myself, the more I bow down, the more fruit my life will produce. All right? That's what it's getting at there. So listen to this. And this is awesome here. This ties perfectly into this. This is John 15. There's a couple verses in here that are very famous, used and quoted often in the Christian community. We're going to go John 15, verse 1 through 8. All right. This is Jesus speaking here. This is in red. I am the true vine, and my Father is the vine dresser. Every branch in me that does not bear fruit, he takes away. And every branch that bears fruit, he prunes, that it may bear more fruit. You are already clean, because the word which I have spoken to you. Abide in me. It's Jesus saying that. And I in you. As the branch cannot bear fruit of itself unless it abides in the vine, neither can you unless you abide in me. I am the vine. You are the branches. He who abides in me and I in him bears much fruit, for without me you can do nothing. If anyone does not abide in me, he is cast out as a branch and is withered. And they gather them and throw them into the fire, and they are burned. If you abide in me and my words abide in you, you will ask what you desire, and it shall be done for you. But this my Father is glorified. By this my Father is glorified, that you bear much fruit, so you will be like my disciples. So you will be my disciples. Bear much fruit. That's one thing to tell if you're a disciple of Jesus. Are you being discipled by Jesus? Are you in God's word? That's one way to start to bear fruit. You got to fertilize it, right? You got to get in the word to get connected to the vine, right? That's one way to get connected to the vine. Prayer, fasting, worship, listening to good preaching, learning, praise. There's so many things, so many aspects of the Christian life to be sure you are tied as solidly into the true vine. The branch that you are is tied in there as solidly as possible. And here's something to think about. As I was going over this, I got to looking. So I knew that there's some flowering plants that if you can look it up, it's called stress-induced flowering. There's plants, if you've got some flowering plants, not all of them do this, but some of them, that if you just give them everything they need, they don't flower. They flower less, right? If you kind of starve them a little bit of water, starve them a little bit of nutrition, not fully, but if you starve them a little bit and induce some stress in their lives, they will flower. Now, this natural response is based upon them thinking, I'm fixing to die, so I'm going to go ahead and flower and produce as many seeds as possible so that this will, more flowers will come after me, more plants I can propagate for more. Since I'm going to die, I might as well go ahead instead of waiting until just the end of summer. I'm going to go ahead and do it now. Since there's a drought coming on, I'm fixing to die. Might as well chunk some seeds out there. That's what they do, right? And so, how many times in your life? This is the application for that. Is how many times in your life have you had stress-induced flowering, right? Stress-induced flowering, where you are. Life seems like it's great, and then something comes out of left field and just smacks you in the face, and you're like, "What am I going to do here?" And when you get on the other side of that trial, and you look back on what God did through that, and how you were refined. To go back on my podcast a couple weeks back, how you've been refined, have you been purified, how you've been stress-induced flowering because of that. You've gained a whole new level of your relationship with God. You've gained a whole new respect for and a whole new boldness for going through that trial with God's help, right? But that's one application of that kind of ties in there. I just thought that was interesting. The stress-induced flowering. I'd heard of it before. But that applies pretty good. Now here's something that applies directly here. I came across this, how to prune grapes. Because think about it. What was Jesus alluding to in his parable there? I am the true vine. What did they have all around there? Vineyards, right? I am the true vine and you're the branch. So he's that main, we would call it, you might call it the trunk, or, the stalk, or whatever, the main vine there. And then there are these branches that are coming off of it. Well, in order to produce the most fruit, you need to, if you just let your grapevine run wild, well, you're not going to produce as much fruit. Now, if you prune back some of the stuff, you can allow the light to get in where it needs to get into, the airflow to be just right. You can prune and train these branches of the grapevine to where they're going to produce even more fruit than if you just let them do whatever they wanted to, right? And that's what God can do in our lives sometimes, I feel. Would it be cool to just go in and, I don't know, buy a Lamborghini and go buy a private island and all, or whatever, or just go buy 10 large pizzas and just veg out on the couch for a little while, a couple days, just eating pizza and doing nothing and just letting the world do its own thing. Yeah, ignorance is bliss, right? But some of that stuff is withheld from us, and some of the pruning gets done in our lives to where some of those things that are extracurricular activities that do not enhance our relationship with God get pruned away, get pruned off. And if it's pruned off, you know what it's doing? What did that say there in John? Is cast out. Anyone who does not abide in me, he is cast out as a branch and is withered. If you're cut off from the source, then that branch, that part, is going to wither and die because it cannot get the water, it cannot get the nutrients that it needs, right? It's going to wither and die and be thrown into the fire. It even says, every branch that bears fruit, he, being the Father, being God, prunes that it may bear more fruit. So God is, if you allow it, if you lean into God, God's wanting to prune your life, prune away the noise and the nonsense in your life so that you can focus on producing more fruit, right? That way you're not trying to grow a new tendril over here to grab a hold and just try to branch out as far as no, you're where you're at, and you can prune away some of those extracurricular activities to help you focus on producing more fruit in your life. More of the joy, peace, love, joy, peace, long-suffering, kindness, goodness, faithfulness, gentleness, and self-control, right? More of that and less of the doing what I want, less of the living the good life, by the world's terms, not living the good, there's the Christian life is awesome. I'm talking about like living the good life as far as the world standards, living it up, going to the clubs, going partying, doing whatever, all that stuff. But also something I found interesting here is the grapevine's stress response to a lack of water. Their stress response to a lack of water. There's a couple things that happen. One thing they do is that the what do they call them? Those little spores or whatever. The way that the leaves breathe on the underside of the leaves, taking in CO2, breathing out oxygen, that whole process, they tighten up to where they're not exhaling as much humidity. Right? They're wanting to conserve the water. And if the vine is not providing the branch with enough water, then the leaves will start to shrivel up. The little tendrils that reach out and grab a hold, those little curly looking things, parts of the vine that grab a hold to try to spread and support themselves, those things dry up. All those things dry up, and eventually the whole grape plant will start dying back. And so that's what happens when you are not tapped into enough water. So think about that in terms of, Jesus said, the woman at the well, he's the living water, right? You want to be in touch. You want to be in tune. You want to be tied in and part of that branch, that foundational branch, so that you do not wither up and die. Because let's say you say, because we're designed to worship God. We're made. That's one of the things, we're made to worship God. You look at all the people that try to chase the world stuff and just try to do worldly things. They end up getting to the end of their life and saying, man, I wish I would have done X, Y, and Z. I wish I maybe would have invested more time in relationships. I don't really know of any accounts where somebody said, man, I wish I would have bought another island or another boat or another car or another jet ski or or another airplane. When you're faced with your own mortality at the end, you're not focused on things as much as you are relationships. And that's very telling, because think of it, if you're the vine and you're designed to be tapped in to the branch, right, of Jesus, and you decide nope, and you just cut yourself loose. Let's say you had some pruning shears or a saw or whatever, and think of it kind of like, you ever seen those cartoons or whatever where there's somebody sitting on a tree branch and they're cutting off the branch that they're sitting on. You know what's going to happen. They're going to fall, right? They're going to fall. And that's what happens if you just decide, I don't want nothing to do with this branch. I don't want to live in water. I'm going to do my own thing. Well, you're destined for eternal death. All right, that's what you're destined for. And so I just thought that was really interesting. The branch that produces the most fruit bows the lowest. It bows down. Like I said, that the one out here by the road on our property, it will bow 6 feet down. Now think about the strength that it needs to have. It needs to have a solid tie-in to the trunk of that tree so that it doesn't break. It needs to be strong. It needs to be getting that sustenance when it's during the times while it's produced. It needs to be really building up strength and endurance so that it can flex enough to endure that bowing down, right? But it's doing that so that it will produce, when it produces fruit, it will be able to bow down, right? So think about that, man, in your life. I just think that's so profound. And just think about that. I'm thinking about it. I'm thinking about a bunch of different examples right now. I don't have time to go into them, but the bough, or the branch that produces the most fruit bows the lowest. So get in the Word of God. Get your worship game on. Get to producing fruit, that's evident. People, like I said, these people driving down the road, they stop in and ask me, or a couple of them, I just seen them stop in and grab a couple pears off there. I don't care. There's tons of them on there. There's plenty, right? But it's evident to everybody drives by that tree that, wow, look at that. That thing is loaded with fruit, as opposed to the other Bradford pear trees. Nobody drives by and says, wow, I'm going to stop in and pick some of that fruit. No, it's not. So try to focus on that and have that fruit of the Spirit so evident to everyone around you that they want some of it themselves. They want to get some of that fruit. Wow, what do you got to do to produce so much fruit? Because I want some of that fruit. That's what we need to have the world saying and have so evident in our lives. And ultimately, we can get that happening and we can make heaven crowded.